Today's presenter, Russell Jackman, is a graduate of the McGeorge School of Law, University of Pacific, and was admitted to the State Bar of California in June of 1994. He has been vice chair of the California State Bar's Law Practice Management and Technology Committee and a member since 1996. He works specifically with law offices and attorneys that need to get the most out of their legal technology and creates PowerPoint presentations for opening statements, direct examinations, and closing statements to be used in court, and can work with attorneys directly to filter their documents and images so that they have the most powerful visual presentations possible. He also works with law offices and solo attorneys to upgrade their older systems to new ones, troubleshooting existing setups, and training attorneys and staff on Microsoft programs. He is available for remote access consulting on technology-related issues, so please feel free to contact him at any time.
Thank you very much. I'm really appreciative of being able to do this presentation today. I'm calling this Them Spying Eyes. It's a discussion about computer security and the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations that were imposed by Europe earlier this year. And it's changed a lot of things in the way that people do business, not just in Europe, but also here in the United States, and we'll be discussing my experience with that. It's a brand new law as far as America is concerned, even though it's been around in Europe for a couple of years. Its impact in America is just being felt, and so this discussion today will not only talk about what's going on and how this came about and what the rules are, but what can be done to be compliant with the GDPR. And it's not as simple as it seems, but in a lot of ways that's because computer security isn't as simple as it seems. So let me first introduce myself as a quick biography. I've lived in Marin County since 1972, except for college and law school where I went to McGeorge. And I've been an attorney since 1993 over at the McGeorge Law School in Sacramento. I'm the owner of Computer Consulting Services. My information below if you are interested in contacting me after this lecture. And I've done a lot of legal technology consulting for attorneys and law firms here in the northern part of the Bay Area, and San Francisco included. A lot of things that have to do with either the interpretation of technology, setting technology up, and being able to help attorneys deal with technology in their everyday business. And I've really enjoyed my practice. I've been doing it for over 19 years. And I've been a member of the Business Network International chapter, Network 54, since 1999. Again, showing my strong link to Marin. I've been the owner of the linked local Marin County group, which is a group in LinkedIn that helps networking here in Marin County. It's Marin County's largest online networking group with over 8,500 members. We do monthly events, and both speaker series and a evening network events. They're all free. You might want to check us out on LinkedIn. And so enough about me. Let's talk about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And it has had quite a bit of an impact already. It was enacted 2 years ago, but it was only enforced in the United States on 5/28/18. Okay, and it creates a class of data controllers and data processors, and it protects what we're going to explain called PII, personally identifiable information. And all of this came out because, and we'll be discussing this further, there just are greater concerns in Europe over the concept of privacy than we have here in the United States. And In Europe, they have the radical idea that you actually are the owner of your information. Okay, that this is not something that is just, your name and your address are more than just your name and your address. It's really your property, and to have that taken away or misused or abused in the way that unfortunately in America we've seen happen a lot of times is a big problem. And Europe just was gonna not sees the United States doesn't take this as seriously as they do, and they wanted to do something about it. So, and in you've maybe seen in a lot of ways, you've gotten email notices that have come in saying we've changed our privacy, we've changed our settings, we want you to agree to this, or we need to have you sign a new agreement for your privacy stuff. And that is because the GDPR has made them do it and is twisting their arms to get it done. As you see down below in this diagram, they show the data protection officer compliance, obviously the 25th of May 2018, nice European format there for the date. Then data breaches, and then personal data. And what they want to see is Europe wants to see the United States, if they're going to do business with anyone in the European Union that is subject to the GDPR, that they have some kind of plan to deal with data and data loss. And we'll explain why that is. Because the biggest question that we have is personal and identifiable information. And what is it? We'll talk about that very soon here. Why do I care about the GDPR? Well, since it was effective from 5/28/2018, there are penalties up to 20 million euro, or 4% of the take of whatever someone is generating from any European country. So it can be a very substantial penalty. And yes, those penalties can be levied on people in the United States. It hasn't been done as of this very moment, but it is something that could definitely happen. And we'll see how the US courts comply with GDPR fines when it happens. And they say that it's applicable worldwide as long as the organization stores personal data of European Union citizens. So the idea is that if you're collecting information, and they talk about a level of scale, but they don't really give a number. They say that if you're doing it on a large scale, but what that large scale is, that has not been determined. No one really knows what would be the cutoff there, and nobody wants to be the company to be responsible for that. There are tools for ensuring compliance with the GDPR. They're complicated, and they do require some sitting down and some real thought to it. It's not the kind of thing that you can just press a button and all of your security things are taken care of and you don't have to do any work on it. It's something that does take some real, like, strategy and knowledge to navigate the GDPR requirements so that your business or your office can say, okay, if the GDPR comes knocking, this is what we would do if we had a data breach. This is our plan. And that's the reason why, is that if there's a data breach, you have to, within 72 hours, report, or there are very stiff penalties, as we've been talking about, for failing to report that there's been a breach. And that's because the rights of the data subject themselves have a greater value than what we have in the United States, including the right to be forgotten. They want the ability for people to say, if they don't want their data to be stored any longer with a particular entity, to also be able to be removed, which is not something that we're so used to here in the United States. So it's a very different attitude towards information and privacy and the repercussions thereof of a violation than what we have here in the United States. And a reason why, and that is because, guys, remember what happened with the Equifax breach? 143 million Americans, names, addresses, and social security numbers were stolen. Maybe you'd remember what happened when the IRS was hacked, and the statement that we're confident these aren't amateurs. It's actually organized crime syndicates. Or maybe you remember when Target got busted. Or how about when Amazon got hacked? Let's face it, these things started to happen so much in the late 2000s, 2015, 16, 17, 18, that we've kind of got numb to this here in the United States. We sort of just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, that's really too bad that our data all got hacked. And gee, we're really sorry, that happened. But that's not good enough for Europe. Europe said, hey, you know what? We have to take this really seriously. We can't just go with this shoulder shrugging attitude. In fact, in a lot of their paperwork, well, a lot of the white papers that they had on the GDPR, they would bring up how the United States let itself get hacked with the IRS and basically said the IRS can't even protect itself. And again, gave kind of a shoulder shrugging attitude of like, oh, well, what can we do type thing. And certainly in the case of the Yahoo breach, which was discovered, gosh, something like 4 years ago, and they went about 2 full years without letting anybody know that they were hacked, is just untenable, which is why the 72-hour limit on notifying people that a breach has been discovered is of vital importance to the GDPR. They were disgusted by the reaction of America, basically, and how little we care about the sanctity of people's data. And that they believe, and I don't disagree with them, that this kind of information that was stolen truly is like having your wallet opened up and money taken out and ripped off by thieves. This is really, it's a lot worse in a lot of ways when Equifax and the IRS and their data gets all spilled out onto the internet. And that stuff, again, that we all realize, you can't get back. Once your information, once your data has been leaked out onto the internet, it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and, oh, well, we'll just get rid of all this stuff now that it's been spread all over the internet. And Europe just doesn't want to do business with the United States, or at least the ones in the European Union are fed up with that, with places in the United States and them having a haphazard, we don't know what we're doing. Gee, our data got leaked out and we don't care, or that's too bad and there's nothing we can do about it. And I've asked people who remember all these things that have gone on what the repercussions were of any of these things. And everyone said pretty much nothing. It's sure our data got ripped off, but what did that mean in the end? Did you get any money back? No. Maybe there were fines, but how big were they? And did they stop any of this stuff from happening? Obviously not, because we still hear about places getting busted all the time and hacked all the time going on. That's a sad state of affairs that American computer security just can't keep up with it. And I won't even get started on politics, but we know that it has an even greater impact going up and down the line. American computer security really has a long way to catch up, and we're fighting a losing game against other countries that are doing more advanced things, first of all, to break into computer systems, but also more advanced things to protect their computer system. And America needs to take it seriously, and Europe may just have to be the entity that makes America take it seriously. We'll find out. So, what are we protecting? The key thing that we're talking about here is what's known as personally identifiable information. And at first you'd say, well, okay, I know what personally identifiable information is. It's not as easy as what you think. You'd say, okay, well, my name, absolutely. Address, sure. Location, I'm not sure about that. The online identifier, well, that gets interesting. Health information, well, we are pretty aware of that with HIPAA. Income and cultural profile, well, that gets really interesting. So what is being collected is sort of the first question that you really have to ask. What sort of information are you getting from your clients? And granted, if you have no clients that are from Europe at all, you then maybe the everything that goes on with the GDPR would impact you at all. But even if you have a single client who has a European base, you could be subject to the GDPR because you are collecting probably one of these pieces of information. And they also talk about the scale of the collection matters. So if it's just one person, that you collect accidentally or something like that, that's one thing. But if you're targeting Europe for that sort of data collection, if you have a regular base of contacts that you're working with in Europe and you're collecting their data, their information, you need to take care of it. Quasi personal data is the part that gets really kind of tricky. And that is a concept based on if you have a birth date, even when combined with other factors, say things that would go with an online identifier or an address, that you could piece together things to identify somebody. So they basically feel that any of these things, like any of this data that you collect on anybody, but it pretty much winds up being personally identifiable information under this definition. And so you just have to be careful what you're collecting. Usually, whatever you collect is going to wind up mattering on for the purposes of the GDPR. And the GDPR wants to make sure that consent to allow information to be collected has to be clear. So you can't play games with consent forms, pre-checked boxes, other things that would, they talked about, certain websites that would, if you didn't click something by a certain amount of time, that you would be opted in. Everyone is considered opted out now, and you have to get them to opt in. The opt-in presumption is dead, and so that's a big difference. So there's no sort of tricks or auto consent that you can do anymore. And I don't think that was a big deal in the United States so much, but even pre-checked boxes that said that say consent is allowed are no longer allowed. So you have to make sure that the person is checking a box, ahead with voluntarily, that there's no sort of auto consent or pre-checked consent forms, and that you have to get this consent now is what you're seeing when you get a lot of those emails, from websites that weren't doing that before or may have had some sort of auto consent form. They need to get your consent again to be able to use your information. So this is a chart that shows the concept of what a data collector is versus a data processor. And that's probably, other than the personally identifiable information, this is the area of the greatest, maybe not concern, but it greatest interpretation. It's hard for a lot of folks to get their heads around this, and it's sort of the center of where data collection comes from, but it also interprets the privacy rights and responsibilities. So at the very top of the pyramid, so to speak, or at the top of the chart, with the responsibility going towards these folks is the customer, the visitor, the voter, the citizen, whoever actually is the person that's providing the information. They are the key person in this instance, because they're the person who actually has the data that they're supplying. That data is considered valuable, therefore they have rights that associate with the value of the data that they're providing. Okay, so those customers then give that data to intermediaries, tools, agencies, and consultants. Those are the data processors. Okay, they hand that data unchanged, unprocessed over to the controller. And the controller is considered the web property, the big corporation. They're the ones that are the ones that eventually take that data, do something with it, and make money off of it. So that's 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 where the controller then has the most responsibility, the largest share of the responsibility over the data. I know that the chart makes you think that the responsibility is on the customer side, but it really is. What it's showing is the web property there as the controller. Their responsibility is towards the customer and towards the intermediaries and tools and agencies, because the controller ultimately decides what gets done with that data. Okay, and it's the one that's going to eventually profit from it. They're the ones that wanted the data in the first place. Okay, that's probably the easiest way to just sort of describe it, is that who really wanted this data to start with. Okay, and what are they, the difference between a processor and a controller is the processor just handing the data off that it collects to the controller, or is it taking that data, changing it in some way, using it for its own purposes, and then handing it over to the controller? If that's the case, processor may not be a processor in every instance. It may be considered a controller, and may be considered a sub-processor of another controller. I know it gets confusing, and that's what we showed down here in the lower part of the chart. Is you have the data controller, then they have other data processors, but the data processor can then sub out to sub processors, which makes the data processor that subs out to the sub processors, that's a controller to the sub processors, but still a sub processor of the data, the main data controller. And the main data controller still is considered responsible for the sub processors, even though the data processor goes and subcontracts out to other sub processors. And that is actually brings us to my story itself and how I got involved with the GDPR, because I worked for an American sub-processor of data that is working for a large data controller that is based in Europe. We as a sub-processor are not based in Europe, but we do take the data that comes from the controller and process it ourselves. We also are our own controller, because we are also generating, we also, even though these folks are clients, we also have our own website that grabs people from Europe, and then they give us their data directly. So we have both a relationship with a controller that provides us with data, makes us into data processors. But we also are controllers of other data that is directly given to us through our website, and therefore makes us a controller over the other data that we get from these other clients based on our website. Hope that hasn't just lost everybody here, and you don't have to, nod your head or anything like that. And of course, if anyone has questions about this, and I'm sure you probably do, because let's face it, none of this stuff has been legislated at all here in the United States, and none of it's been litigated at all here in the United States. So we don't really have a solid set of rules how all of this stuff exactly works, or the size and scale of all of it. And so I can understand people being pretty confused as to how all of this works, but I hope there's a level of logic that's going on. But so what we've been doing here is we've been trying to make ourselves both compliant with the controller that is supplying us with data by being able to uh, uh, show them that we are GDPR compliant. But we also have to show a different level of GDPR compliance to show how we are handling the data that comes directly to us from the customers as well, that doesn't come from our large client. And so it's an interesting dual tightrope to have to kind of walk over, and keeping in mind, what we're supplying as far as our data is concerned, and who our responsibility is towards, and how we're acting. Are we acting as a processor, or are we acting as a controller with certain types of data? So the approach to protection is that you have to provide more than one layer. And I know it may be lunchtime around where you guys are at, so thought this might cheer you guys up. Security of websites and collection. That's really very important, and it's a very overlooked part of what I would consider most businesses in the United States. They have no idea what the level of their website is, the security level of their website is, and how they're collecting this data. Once it's collected, how is it being managed? Where is the data being put at rest on the server, and what sort of security is being applied to it? What kind of encryption level is being done? And all of that stuff, if you don't know what it is, the GDPR will, make you find out what it is, or you could be in big trouble. Security of the collecting machines and data storage. So it's another level of security that needs to be looked at, is determining each individual machine that is contacting or having a connection with the data. How is it collecting that data, and where is it storing it, and how is the safety secured on that? And it's not just a matter of saying, well, okay, we've got stuff encrypted, or it's on a hard drive or something like that. They also want to know what your disaster recovery plan is in case of an earthquake, in case of a fire, in case of a flood, a tornado. Okay, because this information is still considered property. And yes, you may have it protected from a virus, but if it doesn't have an adequate enough backup storage setting, and the data is destroyed somehow through a disaster, that does not really absolve you from liability under the GDPR for accounting for that data. Okay, so if you, it's the again, the other side of it is that people want to have the right to be forgotten too. So you have both the responsibility to hold on to the data as long as you possibly can, but also to be able to erase it permanently if someone says get rid of it. It's an interesting world when it comes to data right now. So a really important and also overlooked part of this whole process is that there's a technical side that we've been talking about, but there's also a contractual side that we're talking about. And that's one of the things that I've been working on with my clients, is not just to get their technical ducks in a row so they can tell the GDPR what their technical specifications are to the GDPR authorities, so they know, okay, well, these are the types of protections in place, and the systems that are in place to make sure that they aren't in violation of the GDPR. But they also have, got to see contractual agreements with our processors and sub-processors, and as a controller to our clients, saying what we would do with this data and how we protect it, and for employees to agree to, if they're going to work with this data, to not change it unless being told by the controller, to not publish the data or let leaks happen or let their computer security lapse, or there's a very large number. I've been working on an agreement right now that it's about 18 pages of quite a few things that you have to cover to make sure that people are not violating and using their computers to violate the privacy of individuals with the data that they're working on. And it takes a very thorough approach, but to make it watertight and make sure that people aren't messing with other people's data, it's not just all about and security. It's not all about computerized stuff. There's a human element to it. And a lot of times that, I think, is being overlooked right now and needs to be addressed in a major way. And then you need to have regular maintenance and audits as part of your business. Even if you're a law office, that's still an important thing to do, because it's your responsibility to protect your client's data anyway, as part of the professional code of professional responsibility. But also, it's something that you would think that your clients really would value, knowing that you are on top of these sort of things, that you wouldn't let their data just get leaked out. I do know that I've worked with some attorneys that have had some pretty significant virus problems and not dealt with them for months, if not even, like a year's worth of data leakage before they do something about it. And, it's something that you owe your client to be your clients to be able to know that you have these things maintained on a regular basis. And at some point in time, I'm pretty sure that malpractice insurance is going to make these sort of things reportable on a regular basis. Otherwise, they're not going to cover you or your firm when something like this happens, and you don't have any plan to account for it. And on top of all of this stuff, you need somebody that's a DPO, a data process officer, a data controller officer, who is assigned to talk to the GDPR and to other GDPR data DPOs that are with other companies, to get them on board and to explain to them what's being done and how the system works, so that you don't have the deer in the headlights look when someone says, am I GDPR compliant? The answer is always got to be yes, but it's not just going to be yes with the one word yes. The GDPR is going to make you go through quite a few hoops so that you can prove that you really are compliant. You know what you're talking about. It's not, as simple as just nodding your head and saying, okay, sure, yeah, we'll go do that, the checks in the mail type thing. They're going to really, put your feet to the fire. It's something they take very seriously. And we had to provide some pretty extensive information in order to satisfy our main client, that we were fully GDPR compliant. And that's really how the GDPR is getting stuff done, is that they aren't going against small entities, but what they are doing is they're going against the bigger entities and saying, if your sub processors aren't GDPR compliant, we'll fine you. And then the bigger entities are then arm twisting the smaller the sub processors and saying, well, if you don't prove to us you're GDPR compliant, we will fire you. And for my clients, that was to lose this big client that they had would be way too much. It would really devastate their business. So it was worth doing what the GDPR compliance was necessary to keep these folks as clients. And And in the end, I thought it was all very valuable for my client because they know so much more about their security and how it all works than they ever did before. Something they should know. The technical protection side of things is the other really difficult thing to have to deal with, and it's not something that is for the faint of heart for sure. It's the security of data. You have to know the status of your firewall. You have to be able to account for it. It's not just something that is just the Windows or Apple standard firewall, because those things will not give you any kind of report as to what sort of activity is going on. And they're not dynamic firewalls, they're very static firewalls. They don't really give you an accurate report of what's going on. I really can't say there's any reputable business that I work with that uses simply the standard firewalls as protection for their system. So you really need to step that up. At least having something, on a Norton level is good. I mean, if you have a router-based firewall, that's okay, but do you know how to access it and to see what's going on with your router firewall to make sure that all that's going on, that a level of security is being active and that it's being updated and everything? That's very important. Antivirus system. I can't possibly stress how important this is to being GDPR compliant. If you don't know what your antivirus is, you can't say when it was last scanned, you can't say what the results of that scan were. Well, if you don't know it now, you should know it, because it's important to know, regardless of GDPR status, you should know what your status of your antivirus is, what to do if you find out there is a virus. Do you even know how to quarantine something? And it's not up to your computer guy to do it. It's up to, you, the owner, to know that that's being done, and not just delegate everything to a security guy. I mean, if you have, say, a data protection officer, even as an owner, you have a responsibility to check in with that data protection officer every once in a while, maybe once a month or once every couple months, to make sure that the status is okay. You can't put things on automatic anymore and just not pay attention to what the results are. You have to take a moment out on a regular basis and say, what is the level of my security? If you don't do that, and that's the one thing that the GDPR is pretty harsh. It does a lot of threats and scares a lot of people, but it's for a reason, and there's good reason to take this stuff seriously. Even if you didn't have the GDPR out there, if you're a firm that's not taking these sort of levels of computer security anyway, I think it's pretty foolish. So I think it's important to take this stuff seriously, whether or not you need to be GDPR compliant. The encryption of data is absolutely vital. If you're not just in transit, but in rest. So when they say in rest, it means that when something is being stored on the computer, say on a server or on it could even be a laptop or a desktop. If it's being stored there, what is the level of security that the encryption is on that particular system, and what kind of security levels does it have when it's sending the information out from that system to other systems? It's very important to be able to account for that in all levels of transit, that the data is being encrypted at every level. Proper backups and knowledge of restoration. And the reason why that's important, okay, yes, it's great to have your stuff backed up, and I have plenty of clients that have their data backed up. The problem is they don't know how to restore it, or they're not able to do anything within that 72-hour window because they're so perplexed by how the system is set up. For instance, RAID arrays is a really good example of that. I know plenty of people who have their backups in a RAID array, but have you ever tried to restore a single file out of a RAID array? It's not so easy. It takes a lot of work. And so it's not something that if a client requests it, you're not able to provide it within 72 hours because you have no idea how your RAID array works, and you hired some computer guy to do it 10 years ago, and he set it up, and now he's nowhere around, you don't know how to find him, well, then that's not going to be a good enough excuse, okay? Especially if you have all your systems go down. So knowing personally how to restore a file from your backup, or at least having someone that's accountable at your firm or your office that will know at all times how to restore something from your backup when necessary, is a very important part of what you're doing to secure your data. Now, another huge thing, and I could probably give an entire hour's lecture just on this alone, is the situation involving remote access. How secure is that? And there are definitely secure ways of providing remote access with strong encryption, but you also have to just keep in mind, as soon as anything has remote access outside the office, that could be abused, or stolen, or misappropriated, and could provide a particular leak. So that is something you have to be very strong in accounting for, and making sure that that is something that doesn't have a problem when you're providing remote access out to different people. And obviously the different security systems that you can put in place for that. And subjects of an entire lecture, I sort of do have a lecture on bringing your own technology to work and what challenges that causes. And then other devices, including cell phones, USB drives, and yes, don't laugh, floppies. There is personal data that's on floppy disks that different businesses still have in their possession, and that doesn't make the data any less valuable just because it's on a floppy. If it can somehow be read at all into a computer, it's still data that's valuable, okay? And that's still data that if you just take a floppy that's got someone's information on it and throw it in the garbage without disabling it, then that could, if that data does get leaked out, then it's your problem. But much more likely is the data that's still stored locally on cell phones and USB drives. It's a lot of data that is, and a lot of people have USB drives that they use once or twice for a backup, and then they throw it into a drawer somewhere, and it sits around for a while. But that data is still there. That just because it's not being used doesn't mean that it isn't still somebody's name and address and phone number and social security number and so forth, that is personally identifiable information, that if that then gets temp comes in and grabs the thing and takes it home with him or her, and then uses it to sell it to the Russians, well, then you've got a data security problem right there. So that has to be accounted for, and people have to do a full-on data inventory to stand back and say, who has the information of the company or the business, and where is it all, or the firm, where is it all being stored, and who has it, and can we get control of it so that we know where it is at all times, because that's very important. Then I talked about the contractual compliance side of things. And the GDPR needs it. It needs it for the employees. It needs it for independent contractors. And you have to spell out roles. And this is what I found to be one of the greater challenges of GDPR compliance, is you have to spell out roles of data controllers or data processors. And you have to get them all in line. You have to say, does this role, what I'm doing here in this part of the contract, does it make me a controller, or does it make me a processor? You have to do that every step, because if you just aren't clear, again, I have to act that none of this stuff has been litigated. There are no American laws on GDPR compliance. So we're dealing with European laws and European jurisdiction over these sort of roles and definitions, and how they will eventually litigate these things, as opposed to the American sense of jurisprudence, such as it is. But because, and part of this is because America really just hasn't reacted fast enough to any of this stuff. And we've certainly had enough reason to. I mean, the things that I showed were examples from 2015 and 2016. So we clearly had 2 years to take it seriously and draft our own GDPR like body or entity who would work in conjunction with the GDPR in Europe. But look, we haven't even adapted the metric system. So what are you going to do? It's if we won't adopt the metric system, we still don't like soccer, then maybe there's no hope that we'll ever even take data as seriously as Europe does. But Europe sort of said, look, we can handle the metric system, we can handle soccer, but you're not going to mess with data anymore. We're going to make you do this, whether you like it or not, or you just can't do business with us anymore. And we're going to see what America does to it. Now, I've seen the bigger companies do a lot. So I think that shows something, that the bigger companies taking it seriously. But we're going to see what sort of complaints we get from the lower end of the scale pretty soon right now. So that's the other thing, is that employees have to agree to be periodically audited. And, it's good to spell out a schedule to say, this is when we're going to check your systems to see that you're compliant. The more you make it a regular course of business that you're doing these things, first of all, I would think that your insurance company would appreciate the approach and say, gee, that's good, you're doing this. But also, it's then everybody knows their roles, and they know to be prepared for these sort of things coming up. And if they're like lax on something like this, that they will be taken to task, but they also have time to get their systems updated and so forth, and to run scans to make sure, to check their firewalls to make sure that everything is in place in time for the periodic audit. And then understanding the GDPR and their role in protecting the data, that's another thing too, is that it takes a certain level of education commitment to this. And you just can't throw all this stuff in on your subcontractors and processors as a controller and just say, this is what we're doing. You have to give some level of explanation as to what the GDPR is, why you're doing it, and what the end result is, and why, in the end, although it's a pain on some of these things to put these things in place, it's still going to be for the best for your company, for your business, for the firm, to take these steps, because it's going to make it more effective technologically to protect the data, and clients or customers' property will be safeguarded the same way you'd want to know that if somebody gave you a bunch of paper documents, that you would put them in a file cabinet that had a lock and was inside a locked building that had security with it. You'd want the same thing with the electronic data too. So the data controller, technically the buck stops here. Okay. So with the controller themselves, they've got a lot of things on their minds, including dealing with the law, the requirements that you have to meet, the rules that are there for the GDPR, the standards, governance, the regulations, the transparency, and the policies all have to be in place to make compliance happen. So that's why companies that are really serious about this need to appoint a data process officer. And it's not such a good idea to have that be the president of your company. Why? Because the president of your company already has a lot of other things that he or she has to do to make things happen. This is a job for somebody that really has technical of the systems themselves. It shouldn't just be a secretary or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have, not that secretaries don't have knowledge, but someone that knows the computer systems and knows what's being collected and why, and has some technical skills to be able to explain that to necessary authorities, and that takes someone with some skill and some training, and not just something that you just, well, you know, slap it on somebody this week and then next week it'll be somebody else, somebody that is going to be with the company for a while, so they understand that they're going to be responsible for an ongoing commitment to the safety of the data of this company. And the data process officer will be the contact person between customers, employees, and GDPR authorities if necessary. So in other words, once the data process officer knows that there's a breach that's happened and that data has been lost, that DPO has to get out there to the customers and say, A, we've lost your data. Your data has had some sort of problem or has been compromised. And B, what's being done about it? See, that's the part that should scare most of the folks in America, because we've never done that before. We've given people notice that their data has been lost. We've never been responsible for actually saying what we were going to do about it once it was lost. You have to do something about it. You have to have a plan. You have to have, there's entities that you can sign up with that can give insurance, monetary insurance for loss of data that you can trace down from an outside source. There's services that will, try to trace down the people that have stolen your data and try to track it and be able to arrest the culprits. There's you contacting the law enforcement agencies, the relevant law enforcement agencies in your area, to say, look, this is what's happened. Most of all, you need to tell your customers, your clients, this is what happened. The sweeping under the rug thing that happened by Yahoo was so inexcusable that it really moved the people of Europe to say that we can't have this sort of thing happen to us ever. And we have to take it responsibly, and therefore you have to have someone that's a GDPR contact that we can talk to, that'll say what's going on to fix this. Remember, if your job includes collecting data, you need to take care of it. Okay, that's the bottom line. Is that you have situations where you may not think that the data that you have is that important, but pretty much anything that you get from a client or a customer is going to wind up being considered data, as we talked about, in the personally identifiable information. They're going to wind up siding on the side of the client or the customer. And if it's something that has value, I mean, let's put it this way: if it didn't have any value, why would someone want to steal it? So if someone steals it, then it has some value to them, and the value that you get that they get from stealing it is really, not up for you to determine. It's really up for the client to determine. Again, it's turned everything onto its head as far as America is concerned, because we all think that data is just something you throw out there, and hey, for uh, uh, a an extra plot of land in a farming game that you play online, you'd be happy to give up your name, address, phone number, and all your friends' name, addresses, and phone numbers that is on your contact list. There's been a lot of shenanigans that have gone on with that, and that some of them, are also from behind the scenes. Just an employee is able to break into a system that they work at and mine all the data. And a lot of it, even more of it, is done by organized crime, either from China or Russia or North Korea. There's a lot of places that will that are dedicated to just trying to rip off the security of different companies. And again, that's a lecture that I have that, it's a separate hour, can easily take up a separate hour. But it's time to take all these things seriously. And so it's a combination of these things. It's not just, you know, the backup systems and that's it. And you have to worry about that. It's not just the computer security side of things, and that's what you have to worry about. It's not just employees, and that's what you have to worry about. It's about all these things, you know, and coordinating them all together into one giant process, into one giant um, uh, 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 system that is set to handle the challenges of GDPR compliance, which again is sort of, as I've said, it's something that the GDPR is making us do things that we already knew that we should do, and that was important for us to take seriously in the first place. And we hadn't, as a nation, we really hadn't. And it was really something that someone had to come around and kick us in the butt and say, this is something that's gonna you know, will make you take it seriously, even if you don't want to take it seriously. And the good news is that working with my clients, I was able to supply all the GDPR compliant material that they were looking for, explain to them all the levels of encryption that we had, not just in transit but in rest, submit to them our employee agreement that we have that guarantees privacy is set for, you know, is a priority of ours, and what, you know, to do, what we do if things get out of control. I was appointed myself as the data process officer to the GDPR, and we signed up for a company called Privacy Shield that shows that we've got the right levels of encryption, and that if a breach does happen, that these folks with Privacy Shield will work with us to trace down the people responsible, and help pay for, they help like pull a fund of insurance to help pay for recompensating people for the data loss that they've had. So it's an interesting you know, experience to go through all of this and see what Europe has put in place for all this, and it's not cheap and it's not easy to do. You know, it's not free, but it's something that makes sense, and it shows that if you're going to take this sort of client information into your business, there's a value to that. That's why that's why you're doing it. That's why you're collecting this data. And if you're going to collect this data, you have to take it seriously with the value that it actually has. And right now, that isn't such a level of priority for America, but I think that's changing. And I think people are beginning to start demanding. It's not just a matter of the GDPR. I think the public is beginning to start to wisen up and say, enough is enough. You guys need to take this sort of thing seriously. If you're not going to take it seriously, well, you know, we'll take our business elsewhere. We'll go somewhere where there is, you know, a better level of security. I know that Target has lost maybe thousands of customers, maybe millions of customers. I know that a lot of people will not use the red card system any longer because they don't trust that level of security. I know that Yahoo lost millions of users due to a lack of trust. And do you want your clients or your customers to be worried about a lack of trust in how you treat their data? Because really, that's all you have in the end, is a level of trust with clients and customers and that sort of thing. And that's the kind of thing that either can set you apart or, you know, get you fired based on the fact that you're not taking that sort of thing seriously. And my suggestion is, you know, look up the different rules that are out there for the GDPR. You know, this is just a survey thing, and I can't be specific on every level of what the GDPR is going to require from your specific company or firm that you're working with, but I can say that there are a significant number of articles and tools out there, and to really keep an eye and an ear on the ongoing um, uh, developments of the GDPR rulings, both in Europe and eventually when things like that happen here in the United States. I know that someone has sued Google already for GDPR violations, and Amazon has been sued for GDPR violations here in the United States. So we'll see how all of that winds up shaking up. Probably a lot of that stuff will wind up getting settled with the GDPR authorities before it actually becomes a law here. But I wouldn't be too shocked if in the very near future we start seeing some GDPR related items getting passed here in the United States. So um, if there are any questions, I am really happy to be in contact with you folks. I have talked to a few people who've contacted me from other lectures, and it's very interesting to hear what your input is and what your thoughts are. And I know that GDPR is pretty confusing. So if you have any questions, I'd be really happy to answer them. Here's my email address and my phone number, and you can also catch me on Facebook if you're interested. And really thank you for listening to this lecture today. And thank you very much.